Okay, today I want to talk about HDL, which is high density lipoprotein cholesterol. It's often called the good cholesterol, as opposed to the bad cholesterol, which is called low density lipoprotein cholesterol. But the truth is, it's a little bit more complicated. In fact, it's a lot more complicated than that. And the fact that LDL, under certain circumstances, HDL, I should say, can actually become negative. It can actually increase cardiovascular disease. I'll get to that a little later. But as far as low density lipoprotein, it's a misnomer to refer to low density lipoprotein, or LDL, as the bad cholesterol, because it's only bad when it becomes oxidized, and then it initiates, or it's involved in processes that eventually lead to atherosclerosis, or a narrowing of the arteries, and eventual cardiovascular disease, possibly heart attacks and strokes. Now, HDL works, whereas LDL is the main carrier of cholesterol in the body. It loads up cholesterol, carries cholesterol to all the tissues, including the testes, where the cholesterol carried by LDL is used as a substrate for testosterone production. As a matter of fact, people with naturally higher testosterone levels usually have slightly higher LDL levels. So the first thing to consider is that LDL is not quite as bad as it's portrayed. It is, when it's oxidized, it does have a relationship with cardiovascular disease. HDL, high density lipoprotein, consists of mostly protein, and what it does is, you can say it's the garbage carrier of the bloodstream. It takes cholesterol from the blood, picks it up, brings it back to the liver, where the liver degrades the cholesterol into bile salts. And that's the only way you can eliminate cholesterol from the body. You can't burn it like fat. The only way you can eliminate it has to be converted into bile salts and then eliminated through that avenue. Now, what was I going to say? The HDL, like I said, it picks up excess cholesterol, carries it back, and that's how it works. Basically, it's called reverse cholesterol transport. I believe that's what it's called. Now, what is a good level of HDL? Good level of HDL is about 60 milligrams per deciliter of blood. You have, if your HDL levels are 40 or less, it's considered low, and your risk of cardiovascular disease goes up. The lower the HDL, the greater the risk of cardiovascular disease. You want to have aim for a HDL level between 40 and 60, but 60 is optimal. I said earlier that having very high HDL levels, it's kind of here we go with the hormesis again. I've talked about hormesis in my Applied Metabolics newsletter and some of the videos. Hormesis means something that is good in certain amounts, but once it gets past a certain point, it reverses and becomes bad. That's the way HDL is. If you have HDL levels as high as 100, it actually increases the chance of cardiovascular disease, because this type of higher HDL is associated with something called apolipoprotein C3, which apparently is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So now, I should mention now, I was going to mention it later, but since I'm talking about the ideal levels of HDL, when you take anabolic steroids, your HDL goes down to nothing, just nothing. In fact, the major serious side effect associated with high-dose anabolic steroid regimes is cardiovascular disease, and the complete dissolution of HDL levels probably plays a large part in that. Now, why does it happen? Because when you take anabolic steroids, it stimulates an enzyme in the liver which prematurely degrades HDL, causes it to get very low. I remember a couple of years ago, an elite pro bodybuilder came to me and showed me his blood test, and everything. This is when he was on steroids. Everything looked pretty good. When I looked at his HDL, it was something like 5. But here's the deal: his total cholesterol was like 110, and his HDL was also, his LDL was also something like 70. With a lipid profile like that, meaning extremely low total cholesterol, extremely low LDL, his low HDL was not quite as bad as it seemed. And what happens is, and this is what happens when bodybuilders use steroids, when they get off the steroids, their HDL usually goes back to normal. And since HDL is related to body fat levels, most bodybuilders try and maintain fairly low body fat levels. So their HDL is usually at a good level, when they're off the steroids. Okay, what are some of the things that affect HDL? As I said, having too much body fat lowers HDL. Not exercising lowers HDL. Type 2 diabetes tends to lower HDL. Systemic inflammation throughout the body lowers HDL. Smoking is very bad. It lowers HDL. Certain hormones will also increase HDL. Estrogen. When your estrogen goes up, all right, guys might not like it when their estrogen goes up, but the good news is that when estrogen goes up, it increases HDL. Women, because of their higher estrogen levels, tend to have higher HDL levels, and this is one of the reasons why women very rarely get cardiovascular disease before menopause, because the higher estrogen levels do two things. They give them a higher HDL, and they also maintain nitric oxide production in their arteries, which maintains the flexibility or suppleness of their arteries. This is why women, until they reach menopause, usually are protected against cardiovascular disease, unless they do things like smoke, get very fat, become extremely sedentary, use drugs, that kind of thing. But then they have natural protection. Thyroid hormone also increases HDL. Of course, exercise does. Moderate alcohol consumption. What I mean by moderate, maybe a glass of beer, 2 glasses of red wine, no more than that. Again, here we have hormesis. If you drink a minimal amount of alcohol, like 2 glasses, or no more than 2 glasses of red wine, you actually get benefits. You get a slight raise in HDL. If you go past that, starts to reverse. Alcohol is a direct toxin for the heart muscle, so too much alcohol will give you cardiovascular disease by itself. The Mediterranean diet, which consists mainly of a little bit of fish, not much meat, mostly fruits, vegetables, plant foods, is very good for raising your HDL level. As far as specific foods, extra virgin olive oil, it reduces inflammation. When your inflammation, systemic inflammation goes down, your LDL goes down and your HDL goes up. So they've shown in studies. One particular interesting study showed that if you substitute extra virgin olive oil for saturated fat, after a couple of months, your risk of heart disease decreases, you're not going to believe this, by 93%. 93%. The type of fat found in olive oil is mainly what they call monounsaturated fat. One particular monounsaturated fatty acid called oleic acid has been found to stimulate a protein in the body called sirtuin-1 or SIRT1 that is associated with longevity. It protects your cells as you age. So olive oil is really good. Other types of good food that to raise your HDL, beans and legumes. There's this the plant paradox. I think I did a video on that. The plant paradox tells you not to eat legumes and beans because of the lectin content. I recently wrote an article about what they call anti-nutrients in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. To make a long story short, this thing about lectins is only partially true. It usually involves eating raw, uncooked beans and legumes. When you cook the stuff, the lectin goes down to nothing, so it no longer becomes an issue. However, the soluble fiber that's found in, let's say, beans, kidney beans, navy beans, lentils, that soluble fiber locks on to fat and cholesterol, helps to eliminate it from the body, and by doing so, it actually increases HDL levels too. Another thing that's often taboo because of the gluten sensitivity controversy, whole grains, such as bran, cereals, brown or wild rice. They can lower, again, because of the fiber content, they can lower HDL and total cholesterol, and by doing that, your HDL automatically goes up. And again, it's the soluble fiber, which is the active ingredient. I won't go into the gluten controversy here. Suffice to say that it's overblown. There's certain people, a very small percentage of people do have a sensitivity to gluten. Gluten is a protein found in wheat. The usual cause of the type of symptoms people get is not from gluten. It's from a class of carbohydrates called FODMAPs, FODMAPs, Can't get into it here. I did in my article in Applied Metabolics on Anti-Nutrients. I explain all about it in depth. Another way to increase HDL, omega-3 fatty acids, such as found in fatty fish. Fatty fish include salmon, mackerel, albacore, tuna, sardines, anchovies, rainbow trout. You want to eat about 2 servings a week. If you don't want to eat that type of fish, you take a fish oil supplement. An ideal dose is, the medical journals tell people to take 1 to 2 grams. That's not going to do a damn thing. You know, when they've done the studies where they've come out and said fish oil doesn't prevent heart disease or cardiovascular disease, they've given like 1 gram. Some of them even give 500 milligrams. That's not going to do anything. To get real protection from omega-3, including a raise in HDL, you got to take 4 to 5 grams a day minimum, and or you can eat 3 servings of this fatty fish a week. It's your choice. Nuts. Some nuts help. Pistachios have been shown in studies to increase HDL. Almonds, peanuts. They have something in it called plant sterols. I'm going to have an article in my Applied Metabolics on the health benefits of plant sterols. Very rarely talked about, but it has some pretty notable heart benefits. In fact, the original anabolic steroids and estrogen drugs were made from plant sterols. I mean, they're very close in structure to steroid hormones, but they're not. That's another story. But plant sterols work they have a structure so similar to cholesterol that when you consume plant sterols, they basically occupy or block these receptors that pick up cholesterol from your food. So more or less the cholesterol literally passes right through you. And again, by doing that, your HDL level goes up. Chia seeds also has omega-3, meaning alpha-linoleic acid, but it also has fiber in it that helps. Avocado, monounsaturated fat, and because of that, it will lower HDL and raise, it'll lower LDL and raise HDL levels. Soy, a lot of people don't like soy. They think it lowers testosterone. It does not, unless you eat huge amounts of it. But soy will also lower HDL and raise HDL. I mentioned red wine, no more than 2 glasses a day. Again, you want to exercise, lose weight. And also, here's a couple of other things. You want to try and eliminate simple carbohydrate from your diet as much as possible. Simple carbs tend to raise blood triglyceride levels. As triglyceride levels go up, LDL goes up and HDL goes down, which is a very good pattern for cardiovascular disease onset. Again, you want to do aerobics. Weight training helps HDL somewhat, but aerobics are kind of a little bit more potent at raising HDL levels. You want to do aerobics at least 3 to 4 times a week. 30 minutes is enough. You don't have to do 2 hours. You want to eliminate trans fats, which are they show up on food labels as hydrolyzed, partially hydrolyzed soybean oil, stuff like that. If you ever see that on the label, don't buy trans fats. Not only do they lower HDL, but they also interfere with amino acid metabolism and lower testosterone. You will want to avoid trans fats at all costs. Anabolic steroids, of course, if you use any type of oral anabolic steroid, your HDL is going to go down in the dumps. It's going to go down to nothing. If you're on the steroids short term, maybe a couple of weeks, probably nothing will happen. However, if you have certain genetics, let's say you're prone to having cardiovascular disease, having an HDL level down to nothing for an extended time, like 3 months, that could push you over the edge and possibly give you a heart attack. So it's a little dangerous. That's why people who use anabolic steroids should heed the advice I'm giving in this video about consuming foods and engaging in certain activities that will try and kind of offset the steroid effect on HDL, but it really can't to a certain extent. Magnesium, the mineral magnesium is known to raise HDL levels. I mentioned soluble fiber. There's 2 kinds of fiber, soluble and insoluble. Insoluble fiber is stuff like bran and grain fiber. The soluble fiber is found in stuff like oatmeal and fruits and beans. Soluble fiber is the type of fiber that raises HDL. MCT oil can actually raise HDL. Saturated fat, strangely enough, raises HDL. A lot of people criticize low carbohydrate diets because the low carbohydrate diets tend to be high in fat, including saturated fat. And these critics always say, well, eating all that saturated fat on a low-carb diet is going to predispose you to cardiovascular disease. Well, there's two problems with that. First of all, a lot of people that use low-carbohydrate diets exercise, and when they exercise and they don't take in carbohydrates, the saturated fat they eat is going to be oxidized. It's going to be burnt. It's not going to stay in the body and cause heart disease. Second thing is the fact that, yes, saturated fat does increase LDL levels, but it also increases HDL levels, so it kind of evens out. See? So, but saturated fat does, if you eat too much of it and you don't exercise, it will raise your LDL and lower HDL. The best single nutritional supplement for for raising high-density lipoprotein or HDL is definitely niacin. I'm not talking about niacinamide. I'm not talking about slow-release niacin, which is very bad for your liver. I'm talking about regular, cheap niacin tablets. You start out, the biggest problem with niacin is that it causes a flushing effect. It has to do with the release of what they call prostaglandins in the skin, which suddenly dilate the small blood vessels in the skin, and it gives you a kind of a flush. It feels like a heat feeling in the skin, and some people find it almost like a prickly feeling in the skin. A lot of people find that very uncomfortable. However, after using niacin for a short time, it doesn't happen. Your body kind of gets used to it. If it really bothers you, you take an aspirin with 12 ounces of water an hour before you take the niacin, and you won't get the flush at all because the aspirin will block the prostaglandins. But niacin will raise HDL by 10 to 30%, which is very impressive. I think any bodybuilder who's using oral anabolic steroids should probably take niacin. Start out with 500 milligrams just in case you're sensitive to the flush effect, and then you could gradually increase it every 4 or 5 days until you get up to about 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams. By the time you get up to that amount, your HDL level is going to be going up and up and up, and your LDL is going to go down. You notice I mentioned oral anabolic steroids. The reason I did that is because the injections usually bypass the liver. They do bypass the liver initially, and they don't activate that enzyme that prematurely breaks down HDL, as do the oral anabolic steroids. But however, like testosterone, let's take one of them, for example, just plain testosterone. Testosterone doesn't lower HDL levels. It does not, unless you take huge amounts. But if you add, and a lot of people do this, they add a aromatase inhibiting drug. Aromatase is an enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. A lot of athletes, bodybuilders, will take something like Arimidex, which is an aromatase inhibitor, because they're afraid of the estrogen level going up when they take certain steroids, including testosterone. The problem is the reason why testosterone doesn't affect your HDL is because some of the testosterone is converted by aromatase into estrogen. And it's the conversion of testosterone into estrogen that maintains your HDL levels and explains why testosterone doesn't adversely affect HDL. Now, if you take an aromatase inhibitor drug like Arimidex, now you're blocking aromatase. So when you take the testosterone, it will adversely affect HDL. It'll raise your LDL and lower HDL. So all the protection that testosterone gives you in that respect is gone. Is gone if you're using a aromatase inhibitor. So keep that in mind. I'll mention one other drug, which a lot of people have asked me about this stuff. It's called Canderine, and it has another name called Endurable. It's sold on the black market as Endurable. It's what they call a PPAR gamma stimulator. I'm not going to go into the biochemistry, it's complex, but let's just say animal studies have shown that this particular stuff, Canderine, dramatically increases endurance in rodents and certain animals. I mean, dramatically. It increases energy. It also is a pretty good fat burner. It really is. And it also actually offers cardiovascular protection. It raises HDL levels. The companies, 2 drug companies, were going to come out with it, but they abandoned the research because they gave huge amounts to rodents, and the rodents got cancer from taking the drug. But not only did they get cancer, but the cancer they got was extremely rapid. It metastasized. It was like a raging fire type of cancer, and it destroyed the rodents. So because of that, they immediately stopped research, and it was never actually put on the market as a commercial drug, but as I say, it's available on black market sources. Some websites sell it. Real Canderine is very expensive. So if they're selling you Canderine for like, $50, it's fake. It's not real. It's true that the amount of Canderine they gave to the rodents was huge, but my personal feeling, when I did the research on Canderine, when I read about the fat burning and the endurance, it sounded so attractive. I was tempted to try it myself. However, two things kept me from doing it. First was the expense. The second thing was just the mere fact that it is an established carcinogen. Even though the rats got huge doses, I personally, to each his own, my feeling is I don't like putting anything in my body that is an established carcinogen. I just won't do it. But I just want to throw that in because Canderine definitely does raise HDL. So that's about it for HDL. These things can, like I said, people that live to over 100, one of the many commonalities they have are they usually have unusually high HDL levels because your cardiovascular health is strongly related to brain health and longevity, needless to say. So these practices would be good for anybody to raise HDL, but they're especially important, I would suggest, for bodybuilders who are taking oral steroids. They're not going to overcome the potent effect of oral steroids at inhibiting or promoting the breakdown of HDL in the liver. But the thing is, when you get off the steroids and you use some of these techniques that I discussed here, your HDL level will go up right away, and it might offset any damage that might have tended to occur because of the steroids as related to cardiovascular effects. So that's about it for HDL. If you want more information on nutrition, exercise science, anti-aging research you can use today, ergogenic aids, fat loss techniques that really work, supplement science, which supplements work, which ones don't, the truth about exercise science. I've been I've been working out, believe it or not, for 58 years. I go back to the days of the original Gold's Gym with Arnold Schwarzenegger, trained with those guys. I know what works and what doesn't, and I impart this information in Applied Metabolics, and this is the type of information you can't get from anyone else. A guy can go to Harvard University and get 4 PhDs, but if he doesn't have the actual practical experience, he's not going to know this stuff because they don't teach this stuff at Harvard. You have to do it yourself. Yeah. So it's called empirical knowledge. It's learned on your own. So if when you subscribe today to Applied Metabolics, it's www.appliedmetabolics.com. I'll send you an invitation to join my private Applied Metabolics Facebook page, where each day I post new information on nutrition, exercise, and general medicine and health. I try to avoid politics, not on the Applied Metabolics. I won't do it. In fact, I'm trying to avoid politics completely because it's such a mess these days that it's a hot. I don't want to talk about it with anybody. It's taboo to me. I won't do it. But anyway, so also there's an email portal on my Applied Metabolics webpage where current subscribers only can send me short questions related to anything they might have read in Applied Metabolics or anything that comes in their head. As long as it's a short question and doesn't require a 10-page answer, I'll answer it. But I don't answer unsolicited questions. I kind of answer these questions as a bonus to my subscribers for subscribing because I appreciate their support. But I'm not on this earth to be Mr. Free Answer Man, to answer every question that's directed at me. I've studied long and hard over well, it's actually been about 55 years, and I'm not going to just give it away for free. So I'm sorry. I impart my knowledge and what I know in Applied Metabolics, and sometimes in comments and questions that I'm asked, I also impart my experience and knowledge. But it's only for people that support my work. I'm just not gonna do it, because to do it otherwise would make me an idiot, and I try not to think of myself as an idiot. So, and that's about it. What else can I say? Applied Metabolics, it's 40 to 50 pages every month, no ads. I'm a professional writer. I don't write medical jargon. Applied Metabolics is easy to understand. Anyone with a 6th grade education, in other words, anyone who knows how to read, who's literate, will be able to get a lot of benefit from it. And even if you can't read, there's ways. A lot of people ask me to have this, this speech recognition edition. Very easy to do. There's a free app on Microsoft where if you subscribe, you can turn on the app. It will actually read the newsletter to you. You don't even have to read it yourself. It can be read back to you. So you don't even need to read to learn how to. I mean, you don't even need to be able to read my applied math. I mean, you can't get better than that, right? So again, that's about it. So if you want to have the best friend you'll ever have, go to your local shelter, adopt a dog. Thank you for listening.